Know this.
Please do permit me to introduce myself.
This creature is the bringer of death. You will never eat. You will never sleep. You will never stop.
For he would arise a walking disease, a plague upon mankind, an unholy flesh-eater with the strength of ages and the glory of invincibility.
My name is Wilson Stone.
Hello, my dear viewers, if there's any of you left. Now, I know what you're thinking. Just where on God's green earth have I been? That's fair enough, and I'll tell you. Let's just say, I've been busy. These days, my eyes are more focused on the stage, portraying such classic roles as, homoerotic kings, creepy Irish axe murderers, and literally breaking every bone in my body to get a laugh. Anyway, after a very, very long hiatus, I finally returned from the gas station with some Halloween goodies for you. Risen from the dead to continue this very popular series.
Oh my god, how embarrassing.
Now, any normal YouTuber would realize that this is probably not something their audience wants to see and would move on, but not us. Not us, goddammit. Like a mummy, we have to dig up this long dead corpse and milk it for all it's worth during spooky season. We're gonna stubbornly dig in our heels and continue what we started, by God. As we've already looked at all of the silent films under Universal's belt, and because I know most of you mindless schmucks can't sit through anything that's silent anyway, we'll finally head into the talkie era, looking at some of cinema's most iconic monsters. Oh yeah, I'm talking about the big boys. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Wolfman. What's made these characters so iconic? And why have they remained in our popular culture for so many years? Let's find out together. In 1931, a year where nothing bad happened at all, Universal would release its first talkie horror feature, Dracula. And yeah, it's pretty easy to see why this one stuck around for so long in public memory. Not everyone has actually sat through this, but I'd wager almost everyone has probably seen, or has at least heard, imitations of Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Talk about an iconic performance. Chaney was impressive to be sure, but everyone remembers Lugosi. His suave demeanor, his hypnotizing eyes, his, frankly really cheesy Eastern European accent.
I bid you welcome.
The pure embodiment of Dracula. It's amazing how he managed to rise from obscurity to play one of the most iconic characters in all of fiction. Considering the type of life this guy led before, that's a real accomplishment. He was truly a jack of all trades, a stage actor, a sailor, an activist, just don't tell his government what for, and even a soldier for Austria-Hungary during World War I. Yeah, really. God, imagine that. You're fighting a war and you realize that fucking Dracula's the one taking pot shots at you. Oh! It's no wonder why the Russians lost. But this is what he's most well known for, and it's for pretty good reason. This is what everyone thinks about when they hear the word vampire. It's remarkable how just one performance can be completely burned in the minds of our popular culture. Now to contrast this in my Christmas Carol series, despite me having my own opinions, which are always right of course, there's not a definite Scrooge. Depending on who you might ask from person to person, you'll get a completely different answer. Some will prefer George C. Scott, or Alistair Sim, or even Kelsey Grammer. But for Dracula, there's literally no contest or even a question. Bela Lugosi is Dracula.
I am Dracula.
This wasn't the first time that Dracula appeared on screen, but it damn sure was the one that left the most impact. Lugosi has such a presence that it's impossible not to pay attention to him. He has complete command of every scene he's in, even in situations where he's more vulnerable. He never has to yell or raise his voice or even physically attack anyone. He's above that. Even in scenes where he says nothing, he's still intimidating as all hell. To contrast this with Chaney, who used every muscle in his face to show an emotion, Lugosi has that blank, lifeless stare which is really unsettling. There'll be times where he doesn't say a thing and just coldly glares into the camera, and yet somehow says a million words. It's interesting how sometimes showing no emotion at all can be just as creepy as being overly expressive. I don't necessarily think that one approach is better over the other, but it's an intriguing contrast. The talent doesn't just stop with Lugosi. There are some other really great performances in here. Dwight Frye as Renfield is another real standout. He's delightfully crazy and is just having a ball playing this part. He's almost like a 1930s version of Gollum in the way he moves in his conversations with himself. I'd be almost content if this movie was just him rambling on to himself for 70 minutes. It's a shame this guy's career never really went anywhere after this movie. He deserved a lot better. For such a great actor, it becomes depressing to think about how the studio just shafted him. He was just so out there and weird that people just didn't know what to do with him. Now, he'd probably be right at home working in Hollywood today, as a lot of people make their careers playing bizarre, out there roles. But after the Hays Code, you were either a hunking hero, a queer-coded bad guy, or just basically boring set dressing. Frye didn't fit the bill of any type, so he pretty much faded into the background. Roles were so scarce for him that he had to end up taking shifts as a mechanic in an airbase. I imagine that had to lead to some pretty interesting conversations at work. You know, I used to be an actor. Oh yeah? Anything I'd know? Oh, this little independent movie, maybe you've heard of it, maybe not, it's called, Dracula.
Wait, what?
Against all odds, he eventually booked a role in that Wilson biopic that nobody saw. It was supposed to be his next big break, ushering in a new era of his life. But it wasn't to be. Tragically, he died of a heart attack right before shooting started. His obituary was only half a paragraph and regulated at the back of the LA newspapers. His life may not have been a happy story, but thankfully he left us with a couple of great performances. Though both the roles of Dracula and Renfield are played to perfection, I think my favorite character in this would have to be Professor Van Helsing. This guy is just awesome, and Edward Van Sloan does a tremendous job portraying him. He provides a sense of wisdom to the character, and is always the smartest man in the room. I appreciate how he's not just a geeky scientist, but is actually the key player in taking Dracula down. Most movies would regulate the sort of role to a wimpy, comic relief character, but Sloan brings a lot of dignity to the part. He's grounded, cool, collected, and is always one step ahead of Dracula. He fits into this role like a glove because he'd done it before. Both he and Lugosi had played these roles previously on stage, so naturally they're both veterans by now. The movie really comes alive when these two are playing off each other, both trying to gain the upper hand. Just seeing two masters of their craft holding their own in the battle of wits is much more engaging than most hero and villain dynamics. Why is it that I find Van Helsing more badass when he's a short old man rather than a sexy Hugh Jackman vampire hunter? Did I say that out loud? Though I love the interactions between Van Helsing and Dracula, the strongest aspect of the movie would have to be the Transylvania portion. The first 15 minutes or so of this movie are spectacular. It builds up a fantastic atmosphere, some really impressive sets. There's great tension with the villagers, the eerie castle, armadillos for some reason, and Renfield being maybe the dumbest man alive to not recognize all these walking red flags.
I never drink. Why? I have chartered a ship. Take us to England. What music they make.
Even 90 years later, this portion is still super unsettling. This could almost be a short film on its own, and the movie would be much better for it. Because unfortunately, this film doesn't maintain this energy throughout, and it quickly falls off the rails. Now, in films like this, it can't always be about the monster, and there needs to be heroes to take him down. But does everyone have to be a block of wood? Besides a few exceptions I previously mentioned, everyone feels bored playing these parts, and it's really distracting. I don't feel a thing for these characters, which is a big problem when they're supposed to be in danger. Apparently the cast felt the same way, because the actor portraying Jonathan Harker, God, even that name sounds boring, said that he never saw the completed film. How embarrassing is that? Admitting that you couldn't be bothered to watch the final product of your own work. The characters aren't annoying or anything, except for one person.
Oh, Martin, please!
But just really bland. It makes me angry because if these particular characters were written a little better, or at least had more distinctive personalities, the movie could have been a lot better. The cast isn't the only problem. What really sinks this movie is just how cheap it looks. This was put together on a shoestring budget, even by Depression standards. This aspect is present throughout the film's running time. I can't be so hard because you have to work with what you've got, but man, some of this is laughable today. Sometimes the cheapness works to the film's advantage. For example, the lack of any real music actually enhances the experience. People tend to forget this nowadays, but when movies are first transitioning to sound, a musical score typically wasn't included. It was believed at the time that audiences simply wouldn't buy non-diegetic sound. It wasn't intended, but just letting the scenes play out with that static noise in the background is a lot more unsettling than a loud bombastic score would be. But other times, man, it just doesn't hold up. With the exception of the first 15 minutes, there's a severe lack of creativity in the way the movie is presented. It's full of these long, static, and frankly boring shots of people just talking. To give you an example of what I mean, There's a single unbroken shot of Mina and Jonathan just talking. This goes on for not 1, not 2, not even 3 minutes, but 4. 4 goddamn minutes. Almost the entire film is like this, and you start shifting in your seat pretty quickly. I can't be so hard on this because that's just the way early sound films were made. But man, some of this is really rough. This lack in creativity extends to the editing too. It's really weird at times. For example, it just kind of ends. Yeah, after Dracula's killed, it just almost immediately cuts the credits. There's no resolution, no last quip from Van Helsing, nothing. Even some of the transitions are pretty bizarre, full of fade-outs, dissolves, and other awkward techniques that don't really work. The director Todd Browning seems to be almost uncomfortable when it comes to the technical aspects, clearly being much more of an actor's director. And while he can be very good in that regard, there's just long periods of time where the film is just kind of boring to watch. It might surprise you to know that there's actually a Spanish version of the film, which on the flip side of the coin is much more concerned with the nitty-gritty technical aspects. Now you might be asking, a Spanish version? Were you high? Well, for once, no. This was actually a thing. When the crew was done filming for the day, another crew of primarily Spanish-speaking actors would come in at night and film the exact same movie. Now, from a financial standpoint today, this might seem insane, but back in the 30s, dubbing wasn't really a thing yet, so to appeal to foreign markets, a different version of the film would be made. This practice didn't last for too long and only had a few examples, but it's an interesting bit of history. It's neat to see just how much effort was put into this. The crew would deliberately look at the dailies that Browning had filmed, and they would look to see where they could improve. They'd go to extreme lengths to be different. For example, if Browning filmed on the left, they'd film on the right. Even small things like the opening titles are different. From what I've observed online, most fans actually think this is the superior version. Which, yeah, I can understand that. It's got more of an edge, more of a bite, and much more elaborate presentation. Or does it? I might be in the minority here, but I think both films are on equal footing. They both have their respective glaring issues. From a technical standpoint, it's much better put together, but cracks in that facade start to show, especially when it comes to the cast. Nobody's able to top Lugosi. It's as simple as that. But I'd encourage you to find out for yourself. Maybe view both as a companion piece to see which one you like better. As it stands, the 1931 version is a goofy but enjoyable version of the Bram Stoker novel. It's just a shame because if this was taken a little more seriously and maybe had a bit more creativity, we could have had a much better final product. But the stuff that works, really works. So I'd say check it out if you have an interest. Overall, a 6 out of 10. Following in the footsteps of Dracula, Universal would release its next feature, also based on a literary work, Frankenstein. Like Lugosi, Boris Karloff's interpretation of the Frankenstein monster has managed to linger in our popular culture for well over 90 years. When someone says the word Frankenstein, everyone thinks of a green monster with a giant bolt in his head. It's interesting because that was nowhere near what the original book described, and yet that's what everyone associates with Frankenstein. It's amazing how one movie can be so popular that it completely erases whatever intentions the author of the original work might have had. Mary Shelley had wrote the monster as being 8 foot tall, being extremely intelligent, and having pale, yellowish skin. But it's this design that everyone remembers. It's in every Halloween store and is on every bucket of candy ever made. A lot of credit has to be given to this production, and more importantly to the makeup crew led by Jack Pierce. The Frankenstein monster had appeared on stage, and even in some silent films before, but they looked, let's just say rough. If this design didn't work or wasn't scary, the film could have fallen on its face. It had to be a daunting task. While some liberties were taken with Dracula, at the end of the day, it's not that hard to fumble the ball. All you really need is some guy in black robes and to speak in a thick Eastern European accent. Easy. But for the Frankenstein monster, you have to design a whole new creature, make him scary, and on top of everything else, have an actor emote under it. A nearly impossible task, yet somehow it manages to resonate. The makeup itself is something to behold. This so easily could have been too goofy or too hammy, but Karloff manages to be not only believable, but turn in a good performance underneath all of it. Without saying a single word too, I might add. This is not an easy role for any actor, and Karloff manages to knock it out of the park. It's little things like his confused grunting and his stilted walking that make the character that much more engaging. We've all heard this type of story before. Man gets too curious and decides to play God and creates an abomination of nature that needs to be destroyed. It's something we've all seen before. Jurassic Park, The Fly, and The Heart of the Seas.
My name is Wilson Stone. Oh!
But this is probably the movie that popularized the old trope. To me, at least, this felt much more engaging than Dracula did, possessing a cinematic, almost more modern flair in its approach. Those long, stilted shots are done away with, and gets much more dynamic use out of its camera. While also not having music, because there's so many loud sound effects, you hardly notice its absence. On the plus side, they finally managed to get a protagonist who doesn't have a personality of sandpaper this time. Henry Frankenstein surprisingly has a lot of depth to him. I like how he isn't just a mad scientist. There's a bit more to him than that. While yes, there are certainly moments where he's over the top, I like how he genuinely believes what he's doing is right. He's a man who wants to push past the boundaries of known science, despite what everyone around him is telling him not to do. Henry's so determined that he'll go to extreme lengths to get what he wants, even if that means locking himself away in a castle and teaming up with a crazy hunchback. I especially like the scenes where he talks to Edward Van Sloan, where both characters argue their points. It brings up a really interesting debate that's honestly pretty deep. When is too far too far? When do we leave technology alone? This definitely wasn't intended, but I think this film has a new sense of relevance now with the debate surrounding AI. Do we destroy said technology? Or can we live with it? Or are we reaching a point where we don't have a choice? The other characters, while nothing spectacular, feel like they're taking the material much more seriously than the cast did in Dracula. My favorite would definitely have to be Baron Frankenstein. This guy just gives zero fucks, and I love it. My literal spirit animal.
Where's Henry?
Why,
Well?
he can't be disturbed just now.
Oh, can't he? I'll soon settle that nonsense.
He makes for great comic relief in a film that honestly has a lot of dark subject matter. Director James Whale was not shy about going all out here. There's grave robbing, hanging, angry mobs, drowning, even seeing the body of a little dead girl. That's pretty hardcore. I'm really baffled they were able to get away with some of this stuff. Unfortunately, there was one thing that they couldn't quite get away with, and it almost kills the movie. It doesn't quite, but it comes extremely close. Instead of falling to his death or burning with the monster, Henry lives. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little dramatic here, but I think this was the single worst call he could have made. The ending defeats the entire purpose of the film, and is so clearly tacked on. Isn't the whole point that the monster kills the creator, and he pays for making this abomination? You know, actually showing the audience that there are consequences when science is pushed too far. But, like the Phantom of the Opera, this ending was also tacked on, because God forbid we can't leave the audience asking questions. It's a shame because there's an easy fix for this. He still lands really hard on that windmill. I mean, that's gotta break his ribcage at least. You can just say he dies from that. And then after that, just fade out with the windmill burning up in flames. How much more impactful would that have been? We don't need that last scene of him recovering. It's incredibly hard for me to say this, but this movie is really affected due to this unbelievably stupid ending. It's a shame because there's a lot to like here. Truly there is. But man, I just can't get over that ending. For what it is though, Frankenstein is still a really good movie, full of memorable characters and an even more iconic monster. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. In 1932, Universal would release The Mummy. This movie in particular was special because it wasn't based on any pre-existing material, and, kind of shows.
What's that? ISIS.
Look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. This movie is not good. While Dracula and Frankenstein both had their own respective issues, there were still good elements buried underneath. You just had to get through some of the more, annoying elements.
Serious feminine, mate.
But here, there's really not a whole lot to discuss. I think the pitch for this was just setting Dracula in Egypt, because it follows it nearly beat for beat, only it does it so much worse. I mean, the location change to Egypt is kind of unique, and I'm a sucker for a good mummy, but even the title is misleading. There isn't really a mummy in this film. I mean, he's there at the start, I guess, but he's in human form for the rest of the movie. There is no mummy in The Mummy. They've lied to you. Unlike Dracula or Frankenstein, I don't feel very intimidated by this guy. I feel like one gunshot would probably take him out. I don't feel like any of the characters are ever in danger, or that he poses any real serious threat. Dracula could turn you into a vampire with one bite. Frankenstein could tear you apart with his bare hands. The most Karloff can do is just stare at you really hard, hoping that it'll do something. I mean, he's trying. He's really trying to make this material work, but man, it just doesn't do it for me. This isn't just a problem of Karloff, it extends to the entire cast. It feels like nobody wants to be there. Given the material, I can't really say I blame them. I can't remember the name of a single character or one line they said, and I just rewatched this a few hours ago. Even Edward Van Sloan feels like he's phoning it in, playing the exact same character he played in both Dracula and Frankenstein. But for what it's worth, he still gets best performance out of anyone, so that's a point, I guess.
If I could get my hands on you, I'd break your dried flesh to pieces.
That is a bone. That is a bone I'm throwing you, movie. Take your bone and be content. Shoo shoo. I think my main issue with this movie is just how contained it feels. Despite Egypt being such a grand location, it's not really utilized. Most of the film is just people standing around talking in cramped rooms. Now granted, that can be done well, but unlike something like Dracula, there's little to no tension, and everything feels more stilted. I feel like there's so much more you could do with this location. Maybe some ancient tombs, burial sites, ruins? I don't know, just anywhere else besides people's houses in the British Museum? There are a few times the movie attempts to come alive, but it doesn't quite get there. For example, this ancient Egypt flashback sequence is actually really neat. Despite it being kind of cheesy, I really dug the way it was presented. It felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see. But it doesn't go nearly far enough for this idea, and just when I'm starting to get sucked in, the scene ends. Probably the closest this movie came to winning me over was a brief moment during the opening scene. It did something that none of the other movies have managed to do. Actually scare me. Karloff coming to life is genuinely really creepy. No, I'm not just being nice, this was actually unsettling. The way he slowly opened his eyes and that one guy's trapped alone in the room with him really got to me. I think the main reason this gave me the creeps is because I've been in the exact same situation before. Well, obviously not. I mean, the corpse of Boris Karloff didn't come to life in front of me. Let me explain. As I've said before, I never like to delve too much into my personal life on this channel, but something that you probably didn't know about me is that I used to work at a funeral home. I've been in this situation countless times before. Alone, in a visitation room, with a deceased man or woman in a casket. One of my worst fears would be turning around and realizing the body's gone, or seeing them readjust themselves to get more comfortable. Even after someone has been embalmed and ready for burial, there's always that lingering thought in the back of your mind. Are they really dead? So I think that's the reason why this genuinely spooked me a little. But besides that, there's not much that stuck with me. I guess it was kinda cool to see how many callbacks the 1999 film put in. I'd always assumed that movie was a remake in name only, but it was neat to see where all these little lines came from.
Your partner dislike to be touched. An Eastern prejudice.
Prince Imhotep does not like to be touched. A silly Eastern superstition, I'm afraid.
What's this?
Part of the funerary equipment of the Princess Anck-Sunamun.
Birthplace of Anck-Sunamun.
I didn't catch your name.
Ardeth Bey.
Ardeth Bey.
Lochna?
We'll definitely be covering that film at a later date, but right now, there's no time. There's no time, sir.
There is no time!
This is probably the first one of these movies that I would actually tell you to skip, which is a pretty low bar. I'm gonna be generous and give this one a 4 out of 10. Well, that's all for now. Oh, what? I don't upload for a year and a half and you expect me to have more? What kind of heathen are you? I have to be honest, one of the main reasons this took so long is because the prospect of returning to the series intimidated me. There's just so many of these damn things that it seemed a bit overwhelming. The low view count and just the sheer volume of the Universal catalog made me abandon the series for a while. But I guess you can call it sentimentality or just wanting to finish the job, because I felt a sudden burst of motivation to finish this in a lot of the season. I really wanted to finish everything this time, but there's like a bajillion movies, so part 3 will be postponed to a later date. Maybe you'll get Halloween in the winter or this coming spring, with the third part being a sort of a lightning round. Who's to say? Anyway, if you made it through, thank you for sticking around, and I hope you have a spooky Halloween season. Until next time, kiddos.
Beware of them spooks, 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 them mischievous spooks, 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 spooks.